8. Assada Shakur. While attending college in New York City during the 1960s, Joanne Deborah Byron became involved in political activism. After graduating, she started going by the name Assada Shakur and joined the Black Liberation Army, BLA, an underground paramilitary organization that responded to racial injustice by waging war against the government. She eventually became a high-ranking member of the BLA, and may have even been the group's de facto leader for a short time. In 1972, Shakur allegedly led a BLA cell that was suspected of murdering several New York City police officers, and became the subject of a national manhunt. In 1973, Shakur was involved in a shootout with law enforcement on the New Jersey Turnpike, which killed Trooper Werner Forrester and left Trooper James Harper injured. Shakur's attorneys argued that she was innocent due to an injury she received during the exchange, but she was ultimately convicted of murder and 7 other felonies in connection with the incident. In 1979, 2 years after being sentenced to life without parole, she escaped from prison with the help of some of her political associates, who held corrections officers at gunpoint and threatened them with a stick of dynamite. Luckily, nobody was injured, but Shakur fell off the radar. It's believed that she spent the next several years living in Pittsburgh and the Bahamas before fleeing to Cuba in 1984, where Fidel Castro granted her asylum. Apparently, the Cuban government gave her roughly $13 per day toward her living expenses, and her daughter joined her from New York the following year. American authorities tried to have Shakur extradited from Cuba, but they were no more successful in her case than they were in the attempts to extradite around 90 other fugitives who were believed to be hiding out in the country. In 1989, Shakur told WNBC reporter Ralph Penza that she still lives in fear of the New Jersey State Troopers, and that her trial was wildly unfair. To this day, opinions remain divided on the controversial activist, with many seeing her as a heroic advocate for racial equality. However, others accuse her of concealing inexcusable crimes behind revolutionary rhetoric. 7. Kevin Johnson. On the evening of July 5, 2005, police officers in Kirkwood, Missouri, began investigating a suspicious vehicle owned by a man named Kevin Johnson. They were unaware that there was a warrant out for Johnson's arrest, but he naturally assumed that they knew. The search was interrupted when Johnson's little brother had a seizure, prompting the family to ask the officers for help. Sergeant William McKenty was one of the several officers who rushed to the scene to provide additional assistance. Sadly, the boy passed away at the hospital from a pre-existing heart condition. Later that evening, Johnson retrieved his handgun from his vehicle and allegedly told his friends that he thought the cops were too busy looking for him to help his brother. A little while later, Sergeant McKenty came back into the neighborhood to address a call about fireworks. He was discussing the complaint with some teenagers when Johnson approached the squad car. The man bent down to see through the passenger window and said, "You killed my brother," before shooting at McKenty. Johnson fired approximately 5 times, striking McKenty in the head and torso. He also shot one of the teenagers in the leg unintentionally. He then took McKenty's service weapon and calmly walked away. According to court documents, he passed by his mother and her boyfriend on the street and told her that McKenty let his brother die, and therefore deserved to know what it was like to die. His mother replied, "That's not true," but it was unfortunately too late for her to talk any wisdom or sense into her son. Clinging to life, McKenty tried to drive away, but he crashed into a parked car and a tree. He got out of the vehicle and fell to his knees, too weak to walk or talk. Johnson noticed this and reappeared, then shot McKenty twice in the head. He surrendered several days later after hiding out at a relative's house, and was ultimately sentenced to death for murder. His execution by lethal injection is scheduled for November 29, 2022. 6. Justin Wyke. One night in 2018, police on Hawaii's Big Island pulled over 33-year-old Justin Waike, who had an outstanding warrant for his arrest. However, before officers could have a conversation with him, he fired multiple shots, fatally striking a 10-year veteran of the force and father of 3, Officer Bronson Kalaloa. Officers returned fire, but Waike fled on foot, sparking a major manhunt. Using an armored vehicle to block the road, police set up a checkpoint and searched all cars leaving the area. 3 days after Kalaloa's murder, while searching a vehicle, Sergeant Brian Tina lifted the tailgate, which caused clothing and other things to fall onto the pavement. As he collected the items off the ground and put them back into the car, he brushed against a blanket and got the distinct impression that there was a person hiding beneath it. Suddenly, 2 bullets were fired from under the blanket, striking Sergeant Tina in the chest. Officers returned fire, and Waike's lifeless body soon rolled out of the cargo hold, bringing the manhunt to an end. A fellow passenger said that Waike had admitted to shooting Officer Kalaloa and that he didn't want to return to prison. Several witnesses confirmed that Waike fired the first shots during the vehicle search, and the officers involved were cleared of any wrongdoing. The 3 individuals who were with Waike during the second shootout were convicted on several counts for helping him evade law enforcement. 5. Ralph Bucky Phillips. After serving his time for a burglary conviction in 2005, Ralph Bucky Phillips failed to report to his parole officer and was sentenced to 90 days at the Erie County Jail in Western New York. Just 4 days shy of his planned release in April 2006, he cut through the roof of the facility's kitchen with a can opener and escaped. During the early stages of Phillips' time on the run, he became somewhat of a folk hero in the region. It's believed that numerous friends and family members harbored the fugitive, enabling him to stay one step ahead of law enforcement. 2 months into his escape, State Trooper Sean Brown pulled over a car matching the description of a stolen Mustang and came face to face with Phillips, who shot at him and sped off. Luckily, Brown survived but suffered serious injuries. The hunt for Phillips continued for 3 months and spanned several counties as authorities followed a trail of break-ins and reported sightings. After learning that investigators planned to detain and question his family, he issued his latest of several threats against law enforcement. Police finally caught up with Phillips at a relative's house in Chattanooga County, where he engaged in a shootout with New York State troopers. He seriously injured 38-year-old Donald Baker Jr. and killed 32-year-old Joseph Longobardo. However, Pennsylvania State Police were able to capture him about a week later. He pleaded guilty, or in his words, guilty as hell, to murdering Longobardo and shooting troopers Brown and Baker. Phillips is currently serving a life sentence at a maximum security prison, where he's extremely unlikely to escape. 4. Carl Wayne Bunchin. Carl Wayne Bunchin had a criminal history dating back nearly 30 years, when Houston police officer James Irby pulled over a vehicle he was riding in as a passenger in 1990. While Irby spoke with the driver, Bunchin exited the vehicle and shot the policeman in the head, causing him to fall to the ground. Bunchin then fired 2 bullets into the officer's back and shot at several bystanders as he fled the scene. He tried to shoot a driver during an attempted carjacking, held another person at gunpoint, and fired at an officer before finally being apprehended. A jury convicted Bunchin of capital murder in 1991 and sentenced him to death. However, his sentence was vacated in 2009. And in 2012, he went to trial again. He was then sentenced to death for the second time. Over the years, Bunchin repeatedly expressed remorse for his crimes, but he failed to obtain the mercy needed in order to avoid capital punishment. After exhausting all his appeals and failing to secure clemency or get his sentence commuted, Bunchin's execution was scheduled for early 2022. A bout of pneumonia delayed the punishment one last time. The 78-year-old convicted cop killer was marched to the death chamber at the Texas State Penitentiary's Huntsville unit. Bunin gave a lengthy final statement once again, expressing remorse for his actions, but failed to fully take responsibility for Irby's death. After spending 31 years waiting for Bunin's punishment to be carried out, his execution came as a relief to the slain officers' loved ones, who were finally able to gain some semblance of closure. 3. David Sweat. Before David Sweat escaped from the Clinton Correctional Facility in upstate New York with fellow prisoner Richard Matt in 2015, very few people knew who he was. The pair led authorities on one of the most expensive manhunts in the state's history, costing taxpayers around $23 million. It ended less than a month later, when Sweat surrendered shortly after Matt died in a shootout with police. Sweat's overnight notoriety sparked curiosity about why he was in prison in the first place. On July 4, 2002, he and two of his accomplices stole several guns from a vehicle. They were loading the firearms into Sweat's car when they were approached by Broome County Sheriff's Deputy Kevin J. Tarsia. At first, the men tried to hide, but Tarsia spotted them. With a loaded gun in hand, Sweat fired at least 22 bullets at Tarsia, who continued fighting for his life even after one of the bullets pierced his body armor. Sweat then got into his car and ran over the already dying trooper, breaking several of his bones. The confrontation ended when Sweat's cousin, Jeffrey Nobbinger Jr., took Tarsia's service weapon and shot him twice in the head. Police apprehended the trio after a short manhunt. Sweat pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a life sentence. Considering the brutal nature of his crime, it's not surprising that authorities poured immense resources into catching him when he escaped from prison 13 years later. After being transferred, against his wishes, to a more secure prison in 2022, Sweat staged a hunger strike and lost 23 pounds, 10.4 kilograms, over a 3-week period. Instead of caving to his wishes to be moved back to his old facility, a judge permitted prison staff to force-feed him. 2. Xandra Harris and Darius Sullivan. A Bradley, Illinois police officer lost her life, and another nearly died while responding to a call about a disturbance at a hotel in late 2021. 49-year-old Sergeant Marlene Ritmanick and her partner, 27-year-old Officer Tyler Bailey, went to the Comfort Inn to follow up on a report about some barking dogs who were left unattended in a car. They visited a room where they believed the vehicle's owner was staying and encountered several people. At some point during the conversation, shots were fired, killing Sergeant Ritmanick and critically injuring Officer Bailey. The two main suspects, 26-year-old Darius Sullivan and his girlfriend, 26-year-old Xandra Harris, fled the scene. Sullivan was apprehended 2 days later in Indiana, at which point Harris turned herself in. Her attorney, Phil Haddad, told ABC 7 Chicago that his client, a mother of 3, maintains her innocence. Sullivan, on the other hand, has struggled to find representation. The first lawyer he hired withdrew from the case without giving a reason. After giving him several months to find another attorney, the judge overseeing the case appointed a public defender. Both Sullivan and Harris face charges of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Their cases are currently ongoing. According to a recent update, Harris's attorney is seeking to limit the number of police officers in the courtroom while her case plays out, due to a concern that their presence will influence jurors in ways that will prevent her from having a fair trial. 1. Stephanie Keller. In May of 2019, officers from the Gardendale Police Department in Alabama arrived at a local residence to find Andy Kimbrell suffering from a gunshot wound. Kimbrell, who worked as a patrolman and a school resource officer in nearby Vestavia Hills, was off duty when the shooting occurred in the home he shared with his wife, 43-year-old Stephanie Keller, and their 2 teenagers. Kimbrell's children were in their bedrooms when he was shot. The man was rushed to the hospital, but it was too late to save his life. Keller admitted to shooting her husband during an argument, but claimed it was an accident. She was charged with murder, but was convicted of the lesser charge of manslaughter, which is permitted under Alabama law when someone commits an intentional killing due to a sudden heat of passion. At Keller's sentencing, Judge Alaric May listened to members of both her and Kimbrell's families. And while Keller's loved ones repeatedly described the shooting as an accident, Judge May said that he refused to call it that. He recognized that Keller had no prior criminal history and was a respected community member before the shooting, but pointed out that the same criteria applied to her victim. He sentenced Keller to 20 years, the maximum of the 10 to 20-year sentence she was facing.
Number 10. Fake Robbery. A fake robbery at a cafe in Peoria Heights ended with multiple arrests in the summer of 2011. Jade Katinas and Karen Harris were booked into the local county jail on charges of aggravated assault and disorderly conduct. Their arrests came after they held up a cafe as a practical joke. They entered the store with rope and fake guns, camouflaged and wearing fake wigs. They believed that their friend was the only person working at the store at the time. However, there was a second employee there who had no idea the practical joke wasn't a real armed robbery. This was the first problem, and the second was a woman at a nearby salon who witnessed the situation from afar and phoned 911. In less than 60 seconds, 4 officers arrived at the cafe. Jade and Karen were not prepared for the situation that followed. When they exited the cafe, assuming they would just drive back home, they were confronted by police officers with real weapons drawn. They were ordered down onto the ground. The cafe was surrounded by cops, and both girls were taken to jail. Jade and Karen never faced any big charges for what they did. After all, they didn't technically rob anyone, and had only been playing a joke with fake weapons. Number 9. Accidental Arson. 4 tourists were arrested in 2018 for starting a hotel fire as a joke. The tourists started the fire to prank one of their sleeping friends, only to cause about $220,000 in damage. The tourists hail from the United Kingdom. They were at the BH Mallorca Hotel in Magaluf, a small holiday resort on the Spanish island of Majorca. It's the kind of place where British, German, and Scandinavian tourists go to drink and party. It's a European spring break kind of place. The tourists, Brandon McCahill, James Brown, Lauren Smith, and George James, were all between 19 and 21 years old. They started the fire by trying to burn their sleeping friend's feet using an aerosol can and a lighter. They set their friend's feet ablaze, but also accidentally caught the hotel on fire. Firefighters had to rescue 7 tourists trapped on the balconies after the blaze spread through the upper floors of the hotel. It was absolute pandemonium on the night of the fire. The flames ripped through multiple rooms, people were running into the streets screaming, and black smoke was billowing up into the sky. 3 Civil Guard officers had to be treated for smoke inhalation, although nobody was seriously injured. Number 8. Deadly Egg Prank. In 2019, a 14-year-old boy was arrested on a murder charge following an egg-throwing prank gone horribly wrong. According to the Harris County Sheriff's Office in Houston, the young teen was behind the wheel of an SUV filled with other teenagers, and they were all throwing eggs out of the windows at passing vehicles. This was on a Tuesday afternoon. With the teenagers throwing so many eggs at so many cars, one of the drivers began to chase them through the streets. The 14-year-old behind the wheel ran a red light to try to escape, crashing into a pickup and killing a 45-year-old woman named Sylvia Zavala. The juvenile, who wasn't named because of his age, was booked in a juvenile detention center for murder. Number 7. The Joke Bomb. A 20-year-old sorority sister named Haley Reed got in some serious trouble in September of 2022 for making a really bad joke. The joke was about a bomb threat on campus. She was attending Western Kentucky University when the police showed up to investigate suspicious materials they thought were part of an explosive device. These suspicious materials turned out to be nothing but construction supplies on campus. and the whole thing was a big misunderstanding. But shortly after the misunderstanding, Haley thought it would be funny to post an anonymous thread on social media, implying that the campus parking structure was going to be blown to pieces. Unfortunately for Haley, online and anonymous are not two things that go hand in hand. The authorities figured out who it was that posted the bomb joke and took matters very seriously. Haley arrived at Western Kentucky University after being raised in the town of Stanford, a place with a population of less than 4,000. She likely never thought that she'd be charged with first-degree terroristic threatening and taken into police custody not long after starting school. It's unclear if Haley will be expelled permanently and sent back to her hometown, but she's certainly in some hot water with the police. Number 6. April Fool's Day Prank. April Fool's Day got very dark in Wichita, Kansas in 2021. A local woman named Arnthea Willis woke up on April 1st and decided it would be hilarious if she pretended to be shot. She called one of her family members early in the morning and screamed that she had just been shot, the joke being that she was lying on the floor bleeding to death. It was an extremely strange decision for a 58-year-old woman to make. She could have made any number of pranks, but she chose the darkest and most serious of them all. Naturally, the concerned family member called 911. This was prior to 8:30 in the morning, way too early for such cruel pranks. Dispatchers sent multiple officers to the house, including a group of firefighters. They all thought there was a shooting at Arnthea's home, but when they got there, the house was empty. The police officers surrounded the home. They blocked the street to prevent people from getting in or out, but it was all just a false alarm. They tried to communicate with anyone stuck in the house, and then were finally forced to make their own way in. But the house was empty because Arnthea wasn't even home when she made the joke. When the police finally did track the prankster down, she was promptly arrested for wasting everyone's time. Number 5. Laxative brownies. In Minnesota, a high school prank resulted in the prankster receiving 2 felony charges. It happened at Lyle High School when a student in 2007 laced a batch of brownies with laxatives and then served the brownies to both students and staff. The thing about laxatives is that they can be extremely dangerous. It isn't like in the movies where somebody chugs a whole bottle of laxatives and experiences some mild discomfort. Laxatives can be deadly, causing violent diarrhea and major bodily harm. Shortly after the student fed everyone the laxative-infused brownies, things started to go very wrong. 7 employees at the school and 5 students began to complain of discomfort. They all came down with a sudden case of diarrhea and stomach cramps, and many of them even left behind bloody toilet bowls. The perpetrator of the prank was identified as 18-year-old Colin Orth. He was charged with felony adulteration resulting in bodily harm. It's a sentence that carries a maximum of 10 years in prison and a fine of $20,000. He would later plead guilty in an Austin courtroom, where he got in trouble for a lot more than the original prank. He was charged with harassing a teenage witness, fleeing police in a motor vehicle, and first-degree criminal damage to property. Number 4. Mooning a speed camera. Daryl Meekham, a local man from Worcestershire in the UK, made headlines in 2021 when he was tackled by 7 police officers and brutally arrested in the garden of his home. It was one of the most dramatic arrests caught on camera that year in Britain, with officers kicking down his gate, throwing Daryl to the ground, and manhandling him into cuffs. And it was all because Daryl mooned a street camera as a practical joke. According to the police, Daryl obstructed them from arresting him for indecent exposure, which is why they had to use such force. They have since dragged him in and out of court to try and get Daryl nailed on the charge of exposure. But what really happened that day with the street camera? According to Daryl, it had always been on his bucket list to moon a speed camera. When Daryl was diagnosed with a rare nervous system condition and told he would die, he drew up a wish list of things he wanted to do before he kicked the bucket. One of them was mooning a speeding camera. Since Daryl already suffered from Parkinson's and heart problems, his diagnosis of multiple system atrophy gave him barely 6 more years to live. When he was out shopping with his wife Sarah in November and saw the speeding camera, he just couldn't resist. It may have just been a practical joke for Daryl, but the police didn't think it was very funny. They sent 7 officers to his house to drag him out of his garden in handcuffs. Months later, Daryl was found not guilty of resisting arrest. The charges of using threatening words were also dropped. But even with all these charges being dropped, Daryl is still looking at huge lawyer fees and other money problems for being dragged through the court system. Number 3. Coronavirus prank. In 2020, at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, an Instagram prankster in Moscow thought it would be hilarious to pull off a joke down in the subway. Instead of everyone thinking it was funny, the guy wound up arrested and doing jail time. His name is Karomat Jaborov, and he had about 60,000 subscribers through his Instagram and YouTube accounts. His prank was to ride the subway wearing a medical face mask, fall to the floor, and then convulse as if he was having a violent seizure. All of this was being recorded to capture the reactions of the concerned citizens who had no idea what was happening. First, they were eager to help, but then they ran away in fear as his body shook and he looked like someone who had been bitten by a rabies-infected dog. The people in the video were screaming coronavirus as they tried to get far away from the man convulsing on the ground. His little stunt incited a panic, throwing the whole train car into a fit as they pushed and clawed at each other to escape. This was one of the many coronavirus pranks perpetrated by Instagram celebrities and YouTube personalities at the beginning of the pandemic. But for Karomat Jaborov, who terrified an entire train of people into thinking they were going to be infected, things didn't turn out well. He was arrested and was initially looking at 5 years in jail, then was sentenced to 28 months. A Russian court found him guilty of hooliganism and gave him over 2 years behind bars. Number 2. The Plastic Doll. When Tyel Morton was 18 years old, he cooked up what he thought would be the most hilarious practical joke of all. He purchased a plastic doll from an adult entertainment store and placed it in the bathroom stall on the final day of school. He thought it would be funny and never expected that he would face nearly 8 years in prison and a potential felony record. This happened in 2011 in a small town in Indiana called Rushville. After Tyel put the plastic doll in the bathroom stall, school officials called the bomb squad. A janitor saw on the security footage somebody in a hoodie and gloves walk into the school with a package, then leave 5 minutes later without it. The janitor immediately thought bomb, and so the whole school was thrown into a lockdown. Canine dogs showed up, there was a bomb squad, and it was a great big catastrophe. In reality, the individual in the hoodie was Tyel, and the only thing that package contained was an extremely inappropriate plastic doll. The police didn't call off their search for explosives until they finally found the doll blown up and standing in the bathroom stall. Tyel Morton was arrested and charged with disorderly conduct. The charge had the potential of 2 to 8 years in prison. He was held in jail for 5 days and his parents had to raise $3,000 to pay his bail. The issue at the time was that Tyel had not brought a bomb, nor had he even insinuated that he brought a bomb. He just walked into the school with a package, and it was the janitor and school officials who mistook it for a bomb. The senior had not made any kind of threat, and yet he was being treated like a criminal. The case blew up overnight and caught so much attention that the charges were quickly dropped, and Tyel never went to jail or was officially charged. Number 1. High school prank gone wrong. A high school prank in New Jersey went horribly wrong and resulted in 62 students being arrested in spring of 2014. Seniors at Teaneck High School broke into their own school and trashed the place. They brought in balloons for some reason and filled the hallways and classrooms with them. They also threw streamers everywhere. They messed up some rooms and they put grease on the door handles. But by far the worst thing they did was urinate all over the hallways. The balloons and streamers might have been overlooked, but the students took things too far by peeing on the floor of the school. Cleaning it up might have been okay with 1 or 2 students, but this was over 60 kids staining the floors of their own high school with urine. They might have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the silent alarm they tripped on their way into the school. The cops showed up and caught the seniors in the act.
Number 9. Las Vegas Slasher. One day in 2022, a man asked a group of showgirls in Las Vegas if they'd take a picture with him. He then pulled out a large knife, like he was going to show it off. The showgirls were frightened, but before they could react, the man stabbed 30-year-old Maris DiGiovanni in the heart. He then turned and stabbed DiGiovanni's co-worker, 19-year-old Victoria Caetano, in the shoulder. The knifeman chased after some of the other dancers who were trying to run away and stabbed 26-year-old Anna Westby. By the time his spree came to an end, he had killed 2 people, including DiGiovanni and 47-year-old Brent Hallett. He also injured 6 others. Hallett's wife, Carmelita, told the Review-Journal that she was just walking with her husband when he suddenly flinched. A few moments later, he said, "I don't think I'm going to make it," and fell to the ground. Another victim who survived told ABC News that the attacker said, "Sorry, man," before plunging the knife deep in his back. Police detained 32-year-old Yanni Barrios shortly after the disturbing event and recovered his knife from shrubs nearby. According to an arrest report, Barrios told officers he thought the girls were laughing at him and making fun of his clothes. The women denied mocking him and said the attack was completely unprovoked. Either way, nothing justifies pulling a knife out and stabbing someone. Documents revealed a strange series of events leading up to the stabbing, including a friend inviting Barrios to stay at their home and then taking back the invite, and Barrios believing people were picking on him during a bus ride to the Las Vegas Strip. Even if he was having a bad day, there's no excuse for what he did. Barrios is currently being held without bail on 2 counts of open murder and 6 counts of attempted murder. Number 8. Murdered medic. 61-year-old Allison Russo Elling served the New York City Emergency Medical Service for 24 years when her career came to an abrupt end in 2022. She was heading back to EMS Station 49 in Queens after her lunch break when a 34-year-old man named Peter Zisopoulos approached her and stabbed her over 20 times in broad daylight. 2 witnesses recognized the attacker and one chased him into a nearby building where he barricaded himself inside an apartment. A hostage negotiator eventually managed to persuade the suspect to leave the building and he was taken into custody. In the meantime, Russo Elling was rushed to a hospital, but it was too late to save her life. She was remembered for her bravery and dedication to the city and as one of the many heroes who responded to Ground Zero on the tragic day of 9/11. New York City Police Commissioner Keechant L. Sewell described the unprovoked killing of Russo Elling as yet another disturbing example of the Big Apple's increasing violent crime in recent years. Zisopoulos faces a murder charge, but is being held at a psychiatric hospital for evaluation while the case remains at a standstill. His lawyer, Wilson Antonio Lafori, told the judge that he doesn't think his client understands the charges against him. The next court hearing is scheduled for late 2022. Number 7. Suddenly attacked senior. 70-year-old Mary Jane Dustin went outside to exercise in Windsor Locks, Connecticut one morning in October of 2022 and wound up in the hospital with serious injuries. During her stroll, someone rushed up behind her and bashed her head with a closed fist. Mary Jane fell to the ground and was left with a broken finger and a major laceration to the head. Windsor Locks Police Lieutenant Paul Cherniak described the ordeal as a complete surprise of the worst kind, adding that Mary Jane was just trying to mind her own business when she was senselessly attacked in broad daylight. Police arrested 40-year-old Alexander Russell shortly after and charged him with first-degree assault and first-degree reckless endangerment. Days after, Mary Jane was still in the hospital recovering, according to her daughter, Kate Brenia, who spoke with NBC Connecticut. She said her mother was struggling with her memory and having trouble putting sentences together due to the head injuries. At the time, the neurologist treating Mary Jane predicted that she might make a full recovery, but only time would tell. Like many other people, Brenia was left wondering how someone could do such a thing to an innocent elderly stranger. Russell's attorney revealed in court that the defendant is homeless and has mental health issues. The judge ordered a competency evaluation to be carried out and set bail at $250,000, with a concern for public safety. Number 6. McDonald's Mayhem. While enjoying a meal at McDonald's in Salt Lake City, Utah one day in 2022, a 26-year-old man was attacked by a stranger. The offending party approached the victim and demanded money and his phone, according to police. He threatened to harm the customer if he failed to follow the attacker's demands, then ripped the gentleman's phone right out of his hand. Employees eventually stepped in and confronted the thief, later identified as 28-year-old Oscar Valdez, who allegedly threw the device at the man he took it from and then left the restaurant. The suspect returned a little while later and sucker punched the victim while he was still eating, causing him to black out and fall to the floor. According to an arrest affidavit, the victim was left with multiple injuries, including a loose tooth and a swollen lip. Valdez fled the scene on foot and reportedly went into a nearby clothing store, where he bought a pair of pants that he put on in an attempt to change up his appearance. He was found at a local supermarket with help from the victim, who identified him. Officers took Valdez into custody on suspicion of robbery and assault causing substantial injury. Number 5. Unprovoked Slaying. One morning in November of 2022, a man approached a 26-year-old civilian at a bus stop in San Francisco and pulled the unsuspecting commuter into a 7-Eleven, where he beat them. He then attacked several more people, including an elderly employee who was trying to call 911. After that, the attacker left the store and beat a 77-year-old man named Richard Owens to death. The suspect, 32-year-old Charles Short, was later charged with murder, kidnapping, assault, mayhem, and robbery. Nearby resident Geisha Galloway told KTVU that there was a lot of blood and a tarp covering the victim's body. In her words, it didn't look right. She said that she usually avoids walking in the area due to a concerning uptick in random violent encounters between normal people and unhinged members of society who attack with a warning. Another local, who asked not to be named, expressed fear at the realization that someone had been brutally beaten to death in his neighborhood. He said that he worked at an auto repair shop where he had gotten used to mentally ill people coming into the business. On one occasion, a so-called crazy guy went into a shop and even beat up some workers. At number 4, Good Samaritans to the rescue. In October of 2022, a 29-year-old woman became a violent assault victim in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. She was on her way home to her apartment one night when a man she didn't recognize followed her into the building's lobby. He then threw the woman to the floor and assaulted her until she was able to break free and run away. The suspect pursued and tackled the woman to the ground, but 6 brave bystanders intervened and held him until police arrived. Officers arrested 19-year-old Bryce Michael Flores Bevington in connection to the disturbing assault. A woman who saw the ordeal and who lives in the same apartment building was shaken by the violent encounter. She and her roommate were riding the elevator down when they heard the victim screaming. The unnamed resident described the sound as bone-chilling, despite all the noise she had gotten used to while living in downtown Vancouver. When they got off the elevator, the woman and her friend saw flyers and other trash scattered everywhere. Then they saw the suspect on top of the victim, holding her on the ground. And while nobody was seriously injured, including the victim, it certainly left deep, lasting psychological scars. According to the last update, police were investigating to determine whether Flores Bevington might be connected to any other unsolved assaults throughout the city. Number 3. Slain Cyclist. In October 2022, 49-year-old Jeffrey Chapman was riding his bike in Clearwater, Florida just after midnight when 2 men approached him and bludgeoned him to death with a tire iron. He wasn't targeted for any specific reason, according to police, but just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The fatal attack on Chapman came about an hour after a similar assault around the corner, which the victim survived but sustained severe injuries in. Officers tracked one of the suspects, Jermaine Bennett, to his workplace at an optician's office based on surveillance footage and with some help from witnesses who provided information about his car. Bennett initially denied the crime but owned up to it. He told police that he committed the brutal act because of the ills of society. He now faces a first-degree murder charge. Local news station WFLA reported that Bennett showed no emotion as he stood before the judge at his arraignment. He's being held without bond as he awaits his next hearing. The other suspect in the case, 18-year-old Savon Morrison, was captured several days after the murder. He was charged with first-degree murder and is also being held without bail in the Pasco County Jail. Number 2. Teen Tragedy. A young man named Kyle Punko was walking near a high school found in Waverly, Nebraska one day in 2022 when he saw another teen eyeing him. Punko began to think the man was following him, so he asked him what he wanted. Speaking with local news station KETV after the fact, Punko remembered that the man following him said he was just trying to make friends. Punko made it clear that he wasn't interested and started walking away, at which point he felt a blade plunge into his back 2 times. He fought back against his attacker, and they struggled over the knife until Punko hit the man's head onto the ground. At that point, the attacker ran away. But that was far from the end. Punko lost consciousness and fell into a small creek where the knife-wielding teen returned and stabbed him again, 4 more times. Both the victim and attacker called 911 to report the incident. During his call, the attacker said he had committed a murder and was still armed with a weapon. Punko was lucky enough to survive after having emergency heart surgery, and the man who attacked him was arrested in connection to the incident. The Punko family didn't know the suspect and believed he had recently moved to the area with his family. With no clear motive for the attack, authorities think the culprit was waiting for a target to walk by, and that the victim just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Number 1. A young mother murdered. Eliza Fletcher was the granddaughter of a billionaire from Memphis, Tennessee, and was supposed to inherit his fortune. But she lived a pretty average life as both a mother and a kindergarten teacher. During an early morning jog one day in September of 2022, she was kidnapped, leading to speculation that someone targeted her in hopes of collecting a hefty ransom. But that theory was ruled out a few days later when Eliza's corpse was found in an abandoned building. While authorities have released little details on how she died, they made it clear that they think she was murdered. 38-year-old Cleotha Abston Henderson has been arrested in connection with the crime. The attack on Fletcher was random, according to Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy, who said there's no evidence the victim and suspect knew each other. In the wake of the disturbing death, female joggers across the U.S. were left feeling worried about their safety. But the incident struck a painful nerve for 22-year-old Alicia Franklin, who told the press that Henderson had attacked her the year before. In a lawsuit against the city of Memphis, Franklin accused local law enforcement of not taking her case seriously. Shortly after Franklin reported the attack to authorities, Henderson was charged with kidnapping and assault. But the victim believed the police failed to treat her complaint with much, if any, urgency. She also accused the Memphis Police Department of not thoroughly investigating the case and falling short of their due diligence. Her lawsuit says if the detectives had done more, Eliza Fletcher's murder could have been prevented entirely. Franklin's allegations include a lot of good points, especially since detectives rushed to perform DNA tests in Fletcher's case, but allegedly failed to take basic investigative measures concerning her complaint. According to a recent update, an advocacy group is seeking answers about why Henderson was allowed to roam the streets at the time of Fletcher's murder, especially when there was enough cause to keep him locked away in custody. Thanks for watching. Would you rather have a stranger approach you and try to steal your phone, or have someone accuse you of hitting them when you had never even seen them before? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye for now.